car ownership and office space. We have loose cubes where, you know, you can just rent a desk for the day. We have zip car where you can just, you know, rent a car, which actually I've been reading has been bringing down, you know, the purchase of automobiles by a lot. And so how is that affecting the millennial generation and what millennials?
Well, it's funny because when I first heard about this panel, I was like, God, another panel on millennials? Don't y'all have enough? Don't you have enough participation ribbons? Haven't we done enough for you already? But it's funny because when you look at it, like for a television network, it's absolutely important because millennials are, you know, they're the youngest one is about to graduate high school. You know, it kind of varies a little bit, but they're in that advertiser demographic of 18 to 49 right now. There are 80 million of them. You know, we have to pay attention to them. So, you know, all of these things where, you know, as a cynical Gen Xer, I can be like, God, don't you know everything? I can be, you know, cynical about it all. But no, but it's very important because just the attitude of the mind. We have to like get inside the mindset to see how we're gonna program our network and how we're gonna, you know, communicate in the office and you know, what's your office culture gonna be like? I don't know where I'm going with that.
Okay.
Keep going.
Well, no, I was going to say, I mean, I think it ties to what you were saying earlier about sort of social being pervasive in life, right? And all these things you're talking about really are social sharing, right? So, I mean, it's much more normative to accept it and be like, well, yeah, of course. That combined with, I don't have any money and I'm living with my parents in a basement, not all of them. But there is, I mean, look, the reality is there is a serious economic issue that this generation is, so if you take social, you take sharing, you take just need, I think that it makes so much sense. And then I think older generations have been harder to come to that, but we're kind of seeing all the really cool stuff that's coming out of it, right? The social creativity that's happening in a lot of these spaces. And we're like, crap, we need to get on board and not just understand it because we need to engage with millennials,
right.
But clearly there's a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship that's happening out of this kind of social sharing and this financial pressure, you know.
Did you see, speaking of car ownership, did you see the commercial, the comparison of the Cadillac commercial that aired during the Super Bowl, I think, that was like, very, like, this guy was very 1%ish, and then Ford responded with it was sort of like a millennial response. Because the Cadillac ad was, you know, I worked hard for everything I have, and I'm proud of this, and I'm walking through my, you know, my mansion with a pool and everything, and it basically says, you know, you earned it, here's your luxury car. Ford did a response, and it was this woman who, it was this woman who, like, worked at a local, she like basically collected manure from farms to go compost. Okay, but she turned it into a business, and so she was using her Ford car to get her to, you know, to all these places, and it was a very millennial, socially responsible response to this, you know, not millennial ad, and I thought it was just very interesting. I think I saw it today.
Jake, I mean, Alison brought up the economy, which I actually didn't have in my questions, but I think that's a really important point, you know, about how difficult the economy has been with this generation growing up in it, and how do you think that affects, you know, how millennials behave and how millennials consume media?
I think the behavior, you know, I'll answer the behavior thing first, where basically you had a lot of promise in the academic world, which is if you check all these boxes, there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And you get to the end of the tunnel, and that light is a lot farther down. And so
it's dim.
It's dim. But I think it wasn't so dim, because you saw that kind of optimism prevail in survey research. But what you did see is that there was a lot of anxiety and pressure following 2009. Now when you poll the broad demographic that is currently occupied by millennials, you know, you see that anxiety still exists a lot in college students, but really burns off among 20-somethings who are in it. And so I think it's created a lot of fear and anxiety between, oh my God, I'm in an environment where I'm figuring out what I want to do, and then you leap into a situation where you're actually trying to realize that potential after being promised a lot of potential, and you had an incredible amount of anxiety. I don't think that in particular has changed their media behaviors, though. I think it's definitely made consumer culture more attracted to things that project innovation and entrepreneurship. You mentioned Zipcar and, you know, brands like Warby Parker that are the small guy impacting the big industry. I think that's very pop culture right now because of kind of the grassroots and DIY possibility of those organizations. But, you know, I think we're starting to see that impact across this generation as they get older burn off a bit now more than ever.
That's good to hear.
I think-
Good news, everyone.
I was gonna say, I think it has sped up the mobile adoption. We see that not just in the US, but other places, that because of cost, broadband or whatever else, that people who typically haven't been able to afford some of those things are just skipping over it and going straight for smartphones and mobile media. So I think that there's probably something there with the dynamic. I have no concrete evidence, but certainly from what we've heard, that there's maybe it's sort of exacerbated the mobile revolution a little bit too.
Do you think print is dead?
Print?
Print.
What is print? I don't know. I mean, I know personally that I do still have some magazine subscriptions. I know, because I kind of feel bad. I kind of feel bad for the industry. I don't want to cancel them. I feel like I'm putting somebody out of a job if I cancel my subscription. But I know that I read Entertainment Weekly on my iPad and not necessarily the printed version. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it's totally dead. I think it's just definitely evolving to a more digital space.
I have the answer.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really.
But we're listening.
I think no, because all this stuff happens in cycles. So right now, if you look at like an 18 and 34-year-old, magazines are boring. They're boring because all this social media came out, and that's significantly more exciting than the magazines which you only had when you were younger. But for the next generation, magazines will be something special, and social media will be something normal. So you can see how it kind of goes in pendulums, right? But also, ironically, there's something called Smosh Brothers. Anyone know what that is? Smosh Brothers is like a comedy channel for 14-year-old boys, and they have 10 million uniques a month. It's huge, it's massive. And they just launched a magazine, ironically. And basically their magazine is doing incredibly well. And not surprisingly, they announced the introduction of that magazine on Instagram. That was their marketing tool. So I don't know. I think these mediums have stood the test of time, and they'll survive.
Alison, what's your thought?
I think that it's less about print as in paper and more about what is it about print, like what does print entail, right? Does print, when we say that, mean really deep journalism, right? Does print mean, long form writing? And I think those things, so it's less about the paper and more about sort of the format of things. And I certainly don't think those are dead. And we also know, certainly in the kids space, that oh my God, getting something in the mail is still as exciting as it ever was, and probably more so now because you don't get much stuff in the mail, right? Everything's like a email. So there's definitely, as Jake was saying, something still about that physicalness.
It's like vinyl.
And in fact, well, maybe we'll start with that crazy. 8 tracks. No. But the other thing I would say is we know, right? We know from data that when you marry physical products with digital products, it amps up the value, the revenue from both of them. Right? So if you have a digital offering and you actually add something that's physical to it, whether it's print or it's in, whatever it could be, something, whatever it is, apparently physical, that it actually, all boats rise. So again, whether that's print or something else, I think there's something there with the interaction between content across platforms.
And I feel guilty having magazines for killing trees, so I feel guilty.
That too.
I'm the opposite of you. I feel guilty about reading a magazine or buying a magazine because I feel like I'm killing trees, but hey,
recycle the ones I don't read.
Is the opinion and affirmation of friends and validation of friends of ultimate import for this generation?
Selfie. Is it of ultimate?
Yeah,
importance?
or let me rephrase it. How important do you think it is?
It's obviously important because people. Okay, so it's like, how many of you have ever posted something on Facebook and nobody liked it and you felt like, why didn't they like that? Like, okay, right. So I think that kind of just proves it. Yeah, it is a group therapy. Again, it's a collaborative sharing thing. The reason you post something is because you want people to see it. And so I think the likes and the amount of likes that you get back. Who did the 10-year Facebook anniversary video? Okay, right. When it told you like your most liked post, were you kind of like, that was my most liked post? But then and then you realize, no, I had much more stuff that was much more interesting. But I do think it's very important because people want that feedback and they want to feel good about themselves. And again, and I was joking about the participation ribbon earlier. But this is a generation that is, I wasn't really, but it's a generation that has been told, you can do anything and you can be whatever you want to be. So when people
Hey, I
put
was
it out
told
there.
that too.
Well, sure, absolutely. But now that we have a forum to put it out there,
Right.
and people are saying what they want to be and what they want to do, and okay, yeah, everything that you post on Facebook isn't always the truth. You know, a lot of it is aspirational, and a lot of it is, you know, wanting to make your friends jealous about the stuff that you're doing. Trip to Brazil. So you do want that feedback to, you know, to feel good about yourself. Yeah.
Jake, were you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that the validation component is really important for high school students, which reflects obviously that life stage where you're very anxious and you're kind of validated by others versus your own confidence and experience. And as you look at the data with older end of the demographic, it plays less of a role around self-expression and validation and more just becomes about entertainment. But it's funny because it's like it's not significantly different than when you wear a t-shirt or a shirt or a piece of clothing to school and you get that feedback in person, you know, before social media, and you say, oh God, people were like really attracted to me in this shirt, or they really like my haircut, or man, I look like a total poser wearing that man shirt. I'm never gonna do that again. You know, so there's a great saying which is like coming of age one click at a time, which is they're doing that. It just happens on social media now. You're validating and pressure testing who am I, you know, in real time.
That's fascinating.
And it's, you know, as important as millennials are right now, you know, it's always important to look at who's coming up next, and so what the next generation is going to do. And it's so true because some of the stuff that we've seen is, you know, the next generation, the teens, the younger teens, you know, they'll post something on Instagram, they'll post a photo as an icebreaker to start a conversation because they're not as comfortable talking about something in person, but they'll, you know, use social media to spark a conversation, and then they can, you know, have an actual conversation about something.
Alison, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, tied into what Jake was saying about life stage. I mean, one of the most important things, and again, because we do a lot with youth and families, is understanding that it's not as if kids' cognitive and social development has radically changed, right? Kids' needs are the same as they have always been. The difference is how they are expressing and interacting and testing waters with different platforms. So this younger generation, like, literally doesn't know life without smartphones or tablets, right? So the idea that they would do this makes complete sense because the platforms that were afforded to them, they're testing and trying with the platforms that are afforded with them. So, but the idea that somehow kids are fundamentally different, or millennials are really fundamentally different from a life stage or a social or psychological perspective, I think is really exacerbated lots of times in the media.
Now, you work in advertising research, right? So tell me what millennial attitude is towards advertising. Really, what do brands really have to do to reach them?
Well, a lot of the feedback that we've gotten about advertising is make it relevant, you know, make it applicable to me. And I think, you know, the fact that Hulu started that question, is this ad relevant to you? That speaks volumes about that. And, you know, millennials want to see something authentic and relevant. And, you know, funny ads always work better. You know, that's no secret. Throw a song in there, it usually works even better. But it's interesting to see, I would actually listen to a panel of millennials and somebody asked the question, what do you think about advertising? And one of the guys got up there and said, I hate advertising, I avoid it at all costs, it pisses me off when I have to see an ad, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. But there's this one McDonald's ad that I saw that I really thought was really good. So it's one of those things where people say they don't like it, but people don't mind watching ads. I mean, you know, and also when it comes to content and when you have to, and when people realize that in order to get content, to get video about a TV show or whatever, you know, you kind of have to have an ad to go there because that's what pays for it. So when people realize that they're willing to sit through a couple of ads if they can get their content for free. So that's been a key thing too. But again, when they do have to see the ad, make it relevant, make it funny, make it authentic. You know, be genuine about what you're saying because we're onto you. We know that you're advertising to us, but you know, make it relevant, make it worth my while.
Jake, what do you think?
I think that the easiest way to kind of understand is this was a culture that welcomed the iPhone ads, breaking indie artists. Like if you tried that in 1994, that indie artist and that brand would have been very quickly written off. And when it comes down to it, you know, like the lines between advertising and entertainment are extremely blurred. That's why everybody in the agency community is thinking about branded content and content is king. So there's a welcomeness to all that. But you know, one big rule of thumb is it cannot influence the story. You know, so there's more openness to integrations, but there's also more critique of how well they're done. So it's very, you know, awesome for a brand to get involved in creating a TV show like Chipotle, just creating a multi-episode TV show for Hulu.
Fabulous.
Which is, it's crazy.
Fabulous.
And they totally
Check it out.
skipped the Super Bowl on that one, by the way. And so I think, people are figuring out, so then what are the lines to color within, right? Because it's like, if you can make a great piece of content that lives, how do you Trojan horse the message of your product, but also entertain the consumer in an authentic way? And people are riding that fine line every single day.
So now we're at Fordham, so let's talk about the competencies that students need to develop to work in advertising media. Alison.
I would say really understanding your consumer and constantly asking the questions about your consumer is the most important thing. So whether it's studying consumer psychology or how your consumer is interacting with media or whatever, to me those are the fundamentals, because if you can answer those questions, you're going to be able to create whatever the next thing is. You're going to understand where they are, so you know where you're going to be creating the next thing. So to me that's the most important thing, is the consumer, understanding people.
Jake?
What was the question again?
What competencies do you think students need to have to work in media?
I'm to work in media, I think, and in New York, no less,
Yes.
right? I think the competencies, just ideas, honestly. A lot of brands are, where's the digital guy, and that whole thing is happening. But I think people are very hungry and thirsty for ideas. Whether you go to work in an agency or a brand or product development or consumer packaged goods, this is like an era right now of way more questions than answers. And this whole millennial buzzword, looking at the younger generation for the answers of the future, will come and go, but I think leverage the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty happening at the top of the pyramid within organizations right now. Which means that if you can bring great ideas to the table, you're going to be an asset to that group.
Yeah, I agree 100% because, again, technology is changing so fast. Measurement can't keep up with it. So all of the things that we have to quantify in order to say your advertising is working on our network, we can't do that right now. And so we kind of just have to trust that it is working. So yes, having the ideas about how to solve those problems and to tell stories about your brand, whatever, in the most positive way is key.
And I'll say that be a smart consumer of media, right? So if you see an ad and it bothers you, why? Figure it out, think about it, intellectualize it. What is it? If you share something, if you're sharing a video, what is it about that video that makes it compelling? What emotional strings did that video pull for you? How did it manipulate you into an action? So really be a smart consumer, because if you're a smart consumer and you understand it and you figure it out and you're in all that social media and you're on Twitter and you're on Facebook and you're consuming and you understand it, but you're understanding why it's smart. Why did this meme go viral? What was it what did it take to do that? How do you tell this great story? Like the Chipotle is a great example. Why is that so compelling? Why was that story so successful? So I think that just if you're a smart consumer and really pull it apart and understand why, I think that you'll be in a really great place to work in media.
And you can use your Twitter account to your advantage.
Absolutely.
So if you have those insights, post them, write about it, because your potential employer is going to go look at that. So,
Absolutely.
in addition to the selfies at the bar, put an insightful thing about why you're sharing this video.
But I would also say, as much as Zach avoided it his entire career, his entire grad school career, learn data,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, data's
I mean,
huge.
and to your point
Yeah.
in your introduction, data as it translates into storytelling is the most important thing that you probably do,
Absolutely.
that I do. Whether that data is quantitative, whether it's qualitative, whatever the form is, big data is where everything is sort of headed, and at least understanding it, even if you're not using it on a day-to-day basis, is really, it's absolutely fundamental, because there's too many things going on and people are looking for ways to essentialize, to understand. So that kind of expertise is going to be really important,
Yeah.
particularly in the next 10 years.
If you can get a big, complicated, concept down into 2 or 3 bullets and make them make sense, you're golden.
And there's a total dearth of data people out there now. No, there is. It's very hard to find really good data people. So if you're debating what you want to do and where you want to be in media, if you're a data person, you're golden. You're not going to have any trouble finding a job. Agree?
Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah.
for sure.
So what is some of the most interesting research you found with millennials that really surprised you? Are there a couple of things that really surprised you?
Well, just, early on, it was just how optimistic, the generation is and continues to be. That was something that was always interesting at the beginning. Now we're kind of dealing with a lot of, you know, behavior, social behavior related to television. And is it a good thing or a bad thing? And we're at the point now where we don't know. You know, you were saying, you know, television is a passive, you know, experience. You want to just kick back and watch a TV show, but now you've got all these TV shows saying, no, tweet about this. We're going to put a hashtag up here. Get involved, you know, get social. You know, my network is definitely guilty of it. Pretty Little Liars is the most tweeted show on television. We have these 6 most tweeted television series episodes in history. Okay, history doesn't go back that far, but still, we can still say that. You know, exactly. But you know, and we're at that point where we're having to figure out ways of looking at things to see if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Advertisers are starting to ask the question. You know, people are tweeting about your show. When I'm airing my ad, are they watching my ad? Why am I paying for this? You know, so that's kind of the next step. We're kind of at that point where we don't have to address it yet, and we can still say, hey, we're good, we're social, come, we're the social network, come on over here. But it's going to get there eventually. So those are the kinds of studies, and it's hard to quantify that too, because, you know, okay, you can test it enough, you can do a survey. You can say, what are you doing when you're watching a show? You can't really know what people are doing. I mean, do you remember what you were doing when you were watching a TV show? No, because why? You were probably playing Candy Crush while you were doing it. So we've tried to do some things in a lab setting where we have, you know, a monitor of what people are doing on their smartphone and what they're doing while they're watching and where they're looking. And are they looking at the screen? Are they looking at the TV? Are they looking at the ad? And you know, some of the early findings, and again, this is very early in the process, but we found that when you have a more engaging show, people tend to look at the TV screen more often, and therefore look at your ads more often. If you've got a show that people aren't really interested in, like a reality show that you can kind of come and go in, you know, you don't really tend to remember the advertising as much. So
You're saying that because you don't do reality shows.
we all have secrets here. But so those are some of the things that we're finding that's interesting right now. You know, just again, I didn't have this problem 10 years ago when I was, you know, coming to the network, because this stuff didn't exist. So this is all new stuff that we're all learning.
Alison, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, and going with that, and I'm assuming this is some of the stuff you're talking about. A lot of the work that we're doing now, less with kids, although in the education space we're doing with the kids, is in things like neuroscience, psychophysiology, biometric testing. So we have a lab here in New York where we actually will test, okay, is high resolution video in a digital ad better than low resolution video? I mean, like little things, but we're not just looking at what someone's telling us, we're actually looking at deep underlying sort of data, that psychological data, physiological data, that tells us heart rate, skin conductance, right, sweaty palms, that tells us what's going on with cognition, what's going on with emotion. As we talk about sort of things that are interesting to get into, anything in that space right now, that stuff is so hot. If you look, game developers right now, they're opening complete SDKs based on face tracking and eye tracking, right? And those things are then tied back into the research so we know where people are actually looking. And so those kinds of things, I think, from a research perspective, are fascinating. You know, we've done work in interactive gaming and in advertising, in fact, when I was still at MTV, on the MTV side, which found things like, if you were putting a pre-roll video, if you want to put a pre-roll video on like a gaming site, you wanted to make sure that you put that pre-roll video before an action game, because the action game, people aren't processing in the same way, right, as opposed to like a cognitive game, like a Candy Crush where you're trying to match things. But if you wanted to have the brand in a game, you wanted to have it in a more high cognitive game, right, where people are really processing information. That's a pretty nuanced thing, but from a digital advertising perspective, I can go back and I can actually create tags in my advertising database, right, in my CMS that says, okay, ooh, this is a cognitive game, this is gonna always be served, you know, in-game advertising, but in our action games are gonna have pre-roll advertising. Just an example, but that's pretty impactful and quite honestly scary sometimes.
Yeah.
Jake?
I think that all I've done for the past like 7 years is research on lots of demographics. So it's hard to say like the most interesting. I think the most interesting is something I just did, which was also the most challenging, which was basically going to like the far, far edge of the front lines of where people are responsible and seeing what's actually working, and interviewing them. And so not actually interviewing in this phase of the project consumers themselves, but basically talking to media executives, agency executives, and being like, you pressed Greene on that thing, campaign or show release, whatever it was, you saw the numbers come back, articulate exactly what worked, why and how. I think it's because there's so much out there. It's basically like nobody has the answers in the way that you need to walk away from the presentation and say, here's how to do it. And you know, we've talked to everybody from managers of EDM artists to heads of content publishing companies, to authors and yoga professors, and basically just said, like, from your lens, what do you actually see working? And it's been extremely challenging because, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and this is a huge topic, and things are still kind of forming as are going to be the new rules of tomorrow. So I think it's called Road to Truth. It's Revolt's big study. So I think that for us has been, you know, very challenging, but also interesting.
Interesting. So the millennial generation of the developing world has technology and purchasing power that their parents couldn't even have dreamed of. So what effect does that fact have on the globalization of millennials around the globe, and you know how millennials deal with that too?
My career has only been studying domestic, but I think metaphorically, if you look at someplace like China, you know, and how technology and social media is going to impact culture there as across all the rest of the world, you just see how we're entering a period where there's a lot of enlightenment, where you're kind of, consumers are shining the light on things that have been, you know, dark for a long time, and maybe that's retro crap from the early 90s, we're really excited to bring it back, or maybe it's looking at things and saying because we've always done it that way is not good enough. And I think technology is the vehicle to do all of that, which is basically enable access to people who've never had it. For, you know, American youth, that means one thing, and I think for youth around the world, that means another thing. Like the common theme is basically unlocking access, and that will have huge implications.
Alison, what technology and innovations are you working on for this demo? Are there specific things that you're working on?
That I can talk about.
That you can talk about.
It's all very top secret. No, we are. I'd say the things that I'm finding most interesting right now are things in actually in the education and learning space for this demographic, because they do have a much more fluid sense again of sort of what platforms am I going to study on, what you know, where am I going to get my information. So I think those kinds of things, I can't give you exact specifics on that. I'd say the other thing, which actually ties to what Jake was talking about with global, is that actually a lot of our work is global, in part because we are studying youth. And one of the things that we are finding is that there's more similarity, or we're understanding more the similarities for this generation that they have because of access, not really just to technology, but to information, to entertainment that's similar. That when you can create products or platforms that appeal to some of the sort of universal values that people have, that you can actually very easily cross borders and monetize across borders, whether it's on mobile, you know, in-purchase platforms or whatever. So I think that's one of the things that we're doing a lot of focus on is, and even can you start things other places that you can't start in the US, which is fascinating, right? Some of these countries where they're more open to stuff, and so we'll launch something in Singapore first, and then we'll bring it back to the US after we sort of test cased it. So I think some of those things where we're seeing more fluidity across borders are actually really interesting for us from a tech standpoint.
It's interesting you say that. I'll just say one thing. I work at Maxus Global, which is a group a media agency, and we often test things in smaller markets because we're a global agency. So we'll test something in Malaysia to see if it'll work, or we'll test in Singapore. A lot of things happen in Asia, some of the smaller countries in Asia, so that we'll see if it works there, and then see if we can roll it out, you know, in the U.S. So that's very interesting.
I found it interesting that Facebook bought WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And again, shut up about Brazil, but I didn't realize how big it was down there, like compared to here, until I saw an article that said, you know, distribution across the world and how huge it is everywhere else. And I'm like, well, of course they want to buy that, and so that it made total sense.
So you had talked, I think, a little bit in your talk about a little bit about multicultural. So can you talk a little bit about is it different ways to reach multicultural? Because at Maxus we talk about like total market and like a total market concept that you don't really have to change it. But then there are, you know, advertisers that go out there and, you know, send an ad on Univision with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, you know, person, and that to me makes no sense. So tell me what your thoughts are.
I think it just goes back to again, relevance and inclusion, because, you know, this millennials and the ones coming up next are the most diverse, you know, than we've seen before. Obviously, Hispanic is a rising, I hate to say market, but segment. And so we just tried to be inclusive in our programming and make it, just make it natural and, you know, incorporate, like the Fosters, the clip that you saw of the Fosters. I mean, could we not hit every single target there? So we have same-sex couple with a multi-ethnic family. One of them has a learning disability. A couple of them, one of them was in juvie. So we hit every social issue on here. But you know, again, at the core, it's a multi-ethnic family, and it's not a big deal. That's just the way the story is. Switched at Birth, our other show, kind of the same thing. You know, we have ethnicities all over the place, and so you see cultures coming together. You know, we have the deaf culture as well as the Puerto Rican culture. So it's all sort of coming together, and it's blending, and it makes sense because we're telling good stories about it, and we're telling stories that haven't been told before. So that's what makes it authentic.
I was just going to say, you know, this year, this kindergarten class is the first class that's minority white, right? Which, wow, right? I mean, if you start thinking, so one of the biggest things is we've got to stop thinking about those of us sitting up here,
Right.
of minority media or even multicultural media. It's just media at this point in time. And what's been interesting for us is looking at, like, even Hispanic, which of course is a really important, you know, demographic or segment to understand, is, oh my God, just because you're Hispanic doesn't mean you're X, right? I mean, that's the thing. People who are looking at that, there are, I think the most recent work that I've seen is, like, if you really dig into the cultural stuff, there's 5 different types of acculturation, and, you know, you're actually reaching different segments, and it segments, you know, between 18 and 25% of Hispanic population might be in one of these different segments. I mean, you can't message one way to Hispanics, and people who tell you you can are completely full of it. So one of the things that we've been doing on the youth market is working with our partners to do more segmentation that's based off of, like, needs and motivations, right? So really looking at the underlying desires of what's going on with their consumers and focusing on that, then layering on any kind of, you know, demographic segmentation or urban, you know, any of that stuff, but really focusing on underlying human sort of needs and wants as opposed to demographics. And what we're seeing is that's a lot more impactful, and you can create a lot better product. You have a lot more insight to create from when you focus on sort of internal human stuff than on demographics.
Jake, what are some of the brands that are speaking to this generation and doing it right?
I think that, you know, when you ask this demographic their favorite brand, it's been for a long time like the same 3. It's like Apple, Nike, and American Eagle for some weird reason. Revolt is number 1. But and I think that the trick is that there's a lot of brands that are cool, and get away with cool stuff. Like Red Bull gets away. It's a drink company, but it can send a man from space. You know, and you ask people why, it's like, oh, because they have a culture of cool built in, so they have warrant to do whatever they want. But I think what happens is, you know, brand loyalty is something that marketers think about very deeply when they think about the youth demographic. And what happens is brand loyalty is no longer this thing that gets established in a very important part of your life, and you forever use Gillette, or you forever use Kraft. It's something that's pressure tested on a daily basis, you know? Is this brand authentic? Are they being transparent? Can I communicate with them? Do they listen to me? Do they have great information? I think that's a big change. And as a result, there isn't this, like, core foundation, aside from Red Bull, who, you know, fuels music events and kind of cheats a little bit, right? There isn't, like, this staple of brands that really get this audience, you know? Apple's the only one who made a phone that felt like the way phones should work. So they got them, you know? But as soon as somebody else comes along and does the same thing, this audience and culture will go straight to that brand too.
But I think Red Bull's actually a great example because they were one of the first, if not the first, kind of CPG brand to create a media part of their company. Like, they have their own studios. So it goes back to earlier when we were talking about, it's about content as advertising and authentic things that are interesting. That was huge. That was really prescient of them to think about that for it. And that's part of the reason why they have that mind share, I think, with youth audiences, because they're not just trying, their lifestyle, they went lifestyle brand in a very big, needed way.
Yeah, I think it's music too.
Right.
I mean, one of the reasons I took the job at Revolt is like I do believe that you could make whatever you want, overstudy this audience and make some cool shows, but like music plays this different role today than it did even like 10 years ago, where people are so multi-genre that you can cross lines and blur different clicks in ways you never could. And you know, all these brands that seem to get it right and get away with having people pass the word on or buy their products, there's always a big music component, you know, whether it's festival sponsorship or like Red Bull Student literally has a music studio that you can rent it for free as long as they can film you.
And I would say also, sorry, just to keep following on, but going back to the millennial parents, music has been a very interesting phenomenon for this generation of parents because it's much more intergenerational than we've ever seen before. And this actually goes up a little bit to Gen X as well, where, and you can honestly thank Apple for this, right? So you got the iPod and you thought, oh my God, this is great, I have my own personal music system, right? But the reality is in a family, there's one account. So that means every person in that family is actually kind of downloading the same library for the most part, right? Unless you sort of get to teens. So you suddenly saw this this is 5 years ago, we saw this massive shift in this phenomenon of kids and parents talking about the same music, talking a lot more about music sharing. You started to see it in advertising, where you had, you know, the kids walking around with their Rolling Stones shirts on and being like, oh my God, I love the Rolling Stones, right? And they were like 7. I think that we've seen an interesting dynamic intergenerationally with music that's probably going to continue just with the way technology is.
Yeah.
So this is the last question, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you for questions. So talk to me a little bit. I'm going to go down each of you about the future. So what is the future? What does 5 years look like for this generation in media, and what are you looking at in the future?
I think 5 years in media, I think people will definitely be more comfortable with like subscription streaming services and paying for content. And if it is true that parents are home and they binge in a different way, then they're going to be okay buying that season of Mad Men or Breaking Bad versus.
You think it's the end of TV?
No, I don't think it's the end of TV because again, it's the lasting reactive experience. So when you want that to go away, then you always have. It's 10 o'clock at night. You're really tired. You can't just do this. Nobody wants that to go away. It'll be different though. I think we'll definitely see way more, pay-to-play models.
Alison?
Yeah, well, in fact, we're already seeing that. The parents in particular, millennial parents, are much more open to paying for anything digital than any other generation because they see more value in it, and they also they don't feel like things like gaming are a bad thing because I grew up gaming and I'm obviously okay. So I think the value is going to change. I also think we're seeing, with the exception maybe of like the Samsung Note phones, things are getting bigger and smaller, right? With some nuance within that, but there's still a very important role of a big screen. In my case, at my house, it's a projector, right? For shared media, and then there's personal media, right? And I think we're going to continue to see more of that, and TV's not going away. It may be platformed differently, it may be served differently, but the idea of a big screen in the house that people will gather around or whatever it is absolutely it's universal. And it's the number one thing that people are still wanting to do with their media time.
Yeah, and I think, live TV events are going to become more important so that you can have that shareable moment in front of a big screen. You may see, I don't know how big this was, but you may see more events like The Sound of Music on NBC, doing live things like that. But immediately after that was a hit, people were like, okay, what are we going to do next year? Let's do that. What's our version of that? So you started seeing things like that, copycat things like that. I think binge viewing is going to become even more prevalent. Again, it's going to evolve. Scripted entertainment, people are always going to want to consume. They're always going to want to have, a connection to characters. I don't think that's going anywhere. Yeah, they're going to watch it in different ways and watch it on their own time. But I think the event programming is going to be bigger.
And I actually think that there's going to be a proliferation of live actual events that people are going to be excited about because so many people are cocooning that they're going to actually want to go out. It's going to be quite a treat to go out and consume live events and concerts and things like that. And I think that brands that can harness that power, with music, with other kinds of things that are exciting, will be part of the future. All right, so that's it for us, everyone. Who has questions? Yes. Can you stand up, please?
I guess this kind of rolls off of
It's
what
hard
you
to
guys...
hear. Can you stand up?
Sure.
Here.
I guess this kind of rolls off of what you guys were just talking about in terms of the future future of television, considering your background. My question more revolves around platform than it does media in itself. How do you see it shaking out with more and more people, especially millennials, moving away from how they traditionally consume television, which is through their cable company, and more towards an internet provider? Right now, I know many more people that have gone years without having cable. They go with Hulu, they go with pay-per episodes on Amazon, stuff like that. I know that Amazon and Netflix have their own cable shows right now that they do. How do you see that changing when you have such a large industry with cable providers, as right now, who also supply the internet?
Right,
You're asking
it's already changed.
Yeah.
And, okay, so at ABC Family, what we recently did was on our app, on our iTunes app you can get on multiple platforms. We had episodes of our shows available. You know, you could get them the next day, get them anytime you wanted. All you had to do was just go to the app and watch them. As of a couple months ago, we went to an authentication model where you had to register with your cable company. So you basically had to prove that you had a cable subscription in order to watch the show on your platform, on your device. Unfortunately, we didn't get deals with all of the cable companies from the get-go. So we didn't get Time Warner, and we didn't get Comcast. You know, we didn't get those deals done in time. So people who are Time Warner cable consumers. Yeah, it's a lot.
No, here, down Comcast is 95.
Yeah,
Comcast is huge.
and Time Warner's like 40.
Yeah,
it's huge.
it's a lot of people. So we don't have that availability to those people at this time. It's going to get better. You know, the deals are coming through, so it's going to move to that. It's going to get better. But the reason they did that was to make sure people still subscribe to cable. It was, you know, to make sure that, you know, they weren't pirating the content from, well, I mean, you're still going to pirate no matter what if you're going to pirate. But they wanted to, you know, reinforce the value of the cable subscription to those cable companies.
You have a follow-up? Go ahead, quick.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Do you think that that's kind of trying to force an old model on people that they have to
Possibly.
that they have to have a cable subscription to watch something online? And do you think that might change? That it's just really trying to shoehorn an ancient system into the future?
Well, for a cable network, it seemed to make sense because you're subscribing for cable anyway, so just here register and then you can get it. Some of the broadcast networks are doing the same thing, and they're having a problem because people are saying, wait a minute, I get my broadcast, like ABC, NBC. They were saying, you know, I get that for free, why do I now have to have a cable subscription to do this? So they're having some problems with that. For a cable, on the cable side, it's been a little bit easier, but I don't know. I don't know if that's the right way to go, but that's unfortunately not unfortunately. That's where we are right now with a lot of things, so we'll just kind of see how it develops. Next year, who knows? 5 years, who knows?
Yeah, you see like a lot of hybrid models until the new model is actually going to be in place. You were asking what skill sets are needed to go work in media. Honestly, just go build the next Nielsen. Because that's where all this stuff ties back to. Yeah. All this stuff ties back to that. And so, you know, at the business level, it looks like having a really good integrated marketing department and agency partners that are willing to take a risk, you know, are willing to say, okay, we don't have to buy impressions, we can, you know, buy pre and post brand halo or something like that. But it's, you know, the good news is people are talking about TV and watching TV content more than ever before. Just how they're doing it is not measured in the ways that business is done. And that's the challenge. So it's not that TV content is less interesting or people are going to not want to subscribe to cable. And I did a panel here with Horst, who runs ARF, and he was basically like, you watch people go in and out of youth, and yes, they might cut the cord as they go through college, but as soon as they have kids, that thing's getting activated right away.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think we also don't know, we were asking about the future of 5 years, we also don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing we see that's surprising is cable gets reactivated with the older demographic.
Well, but I actually think that's changing. That is definitely going to change because we are seeing families now at a more rapid pace because of things like Netflix for kids, right? Of things that they were because of the DVR, right? But I think as we've now got more SVOD, we're going to start seeing that move back. And look, I think the cable companies, because of infrastructure in the same way that the telephone companies are probably going to fight it tooth and nail and try to figure it out, is my gut. But I think we're going to see the consumer changing really quickly, and I think we're also going to see other people moving into space. I mean, what some of the TV like platform hardware companies are doing right now, if you guys went to CES, and you're seeing is
Consumer electronics show.
Sorry, Consumer Electronics Show, like 160,000 people in Vegas, it's horrible. But what we saw was the TV companies sort of stepping away from relying on cable providers to aggregate and personalize content and do it on their own systems. So some of the stuff coming out from LG and Samsung is honestly amazing. Like, you could be going through and it will actually show you all the content you could get from all of your subscriptions, and it will literally pull up, I think this was LG, it'll pull up, oh, you really wanted to watch Mad Men? Well, you have these 4 subscriptions, you can get it free on this one, $1.99 for this one, so it's actually gonna personalize it for you, and obviously the consumer's gonna go with whichever one is free. Now, they may have already paid for it, right, so it's not necessarily free, but that's hardware stepping in to what is a different infrastructure problem.
Right.
So people are gonna try to solve it.
TV is a concept now, it's not a device. You can watch TV on your phone, watch it, on a TV, but, it's a concept now, it's the content, yeah.
Anyone else? Yes.
Thanks for the sharing. Could you talk about examples of how you do the consumer research and analysis of social media, especially like what parts and what points you are looking at from social media?
The question, in case you didn't hear, is how you do research with this demographic.
Social media, specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a variety of tools. Oh my God, I feel like it's like a new tool coming out every single week. It's some sort of social media data scraping, text analysis kind of thing. So there's actually a lot right now. There's actually some interesting things going on with some academic university partnerships. I know Texas Tech is partnering with, I forgot, one of the services to start doing more sort of in-depth analysis. So we internally don't do that much. We usually say, oh, you want social media analysis? Here's one of 7 platforms that looks really interesting. We can integrate that into the work that we're doing for you, but but the problem is actually aggregating them across the social media sites, right? So what Jake was saying is it's not about one site, it's about how people are using different sites contextually. I don't think that we're there yet for social media analysis. I think there's definitely some space for that sort of contextualized piece added into data and textual analysis for it.
Anyone else? Yes.
Jake, you told us that all is very complex and there is no how to get the value out of the millennials. But Revolt is so much depending on this. So what's your take or Revolt's take how to go from here? And what do? You do some research we learned, but you don't have a year or you don't have 2 years to finally be successful in there. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, of how we're I think so Revolt is on the road to Nielsen. To actually get Nielsen made takes a long time, take up to 2 years, might take longer. And so what that means in the meantime is partners that are going to work with a company like Revolt in that place are not buying Revolt for the size of the audience. You're buying Revolt for what it does to your brand. So if you are the first alcohol sponsor, if you are a car president, you own the exclusive or being the only automotive company on that channel, there's a big case to be made about what that does for your brand. And that said, it's like what people are looking for from a TV company now is they look at it like it's a creative agency. They come to you and they say, show me your portfolio, show me your assets. And, for us, like one of the things, we have 2 studios. That's big, and we have on-the-ground events, and we have social media, and they basically say, okay, put together, just like an agency, an answer to this proposal. And so we have a lucky handful of partners that are growing, that take risks with a company like that. And who knows, eventually maybe we'll get to a place where people come to Revolt because the audience is so big and they're buying impressions. But the idea is that when that 2 years comes, hopefully the next Nielsen will be there. You know what I mean? So I think that's where we're headed now.
Yeah, and you've got such a great opportunity right now, being such a new, a new network, that you can use that irreverence you're talking about to really stand out, to make a difference. You can write your own rules. You don't have to do it the way that everybody else does, because you're not measured. You can do whatever the heck you want.
Right.
I've got to report to Nielsen numbers. I've got to keep that #1 ranking.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a different thing.
Even though we all know that it's crap. It really is, right?
No, it's not.
It is. Come on, let's be honest. The web analytics, right, for you guys who are doing digital and web and mobile analytics, they're ridiculous. I literally would have fights when I worked at Nick because the people who were doing the sort of aggregated web analytics, right, for how many people on your site, would be like, well, we only test one computer in the household. And I'm like, but dude, the kids are not on that one computer, right? They're on the 3 other computers. And they were telling us that 60% of the people on Nick.com were adults. And I'm kind of like, probably not, a little bit of my cognitive filter there. So I think that, we talk a lot in the industry about engagement, right? So figuring out what engagement looks like for millennials, or really for any audience, is the key. And it's multi-platform.
You have to get brands to believe that, though.
But they're definitely moving for it, right?
They're moving towards that direction, but a lot of brands don't believe it.
No.
Look at the numbers.
You're right. No. I mean, look, it is slow, and part of
I'm
that,
telling you.
but part of that's the agency world pushing
It is.
back, like, oh God, no, just let us kind of live in the world that we're living in. But the reality is, I mean, just to give you a really short example, when I was still at Nick, we had Nicktropolis, which was the first virtual world for kids. This is a long time ago. And I got in this argument with our ad sales team because they were charging, or integrated marketing, because they were charging all this money to build like a room for Nintendo, and you'd walk into the room with your avatar and it would like show you a video of whatever the Nintendo DS had. And then on the other side, if you were Nintendo, you could have like really cool branded t-shirts for your avatars. And I went back and I said, okay guys, actually there's a lot more impact and engagement if a kid picks to wear your Super Mario t-shirt than if they go and sit in your room, but you're charging literally 20 to 30 times more for this, and it's costing you that much more. So we need to understand what's the emotional brand engagement of that t-shirt versus walking in that room, and that's what we need to charge by. Not how much it costs you to produce, not how big it is, because big doesn't matter anymore. Engagement matters. So I think those kind of things, and figuring out how do we do that multi-platform for brands, we're still figuring that out.
It's more data.
We have time for one more question. Anyone? Sure? All right, go once, up.
I guess someone else. Where do you see the future of cross-platform media? Where instead of having, I know you're talking about gaming, television, snippets, stuff like that, how do you see that actually evolving? Because I know that the past year, there was a sort of first try with that I believe that there was a game that was also a television show that defined.
Talking about
something
spring
like
break, that spring break Twitter thing by any chance?
What?
Are you talking about that spring break Twitter?
No, there was a video game that was also a television show, I think on Sci-Fi Channel, that they were actually trying to cross platforms with it. And you see that that's going to happen in the future with other media as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all hate the word transmedia, but there's something to transmedia. I think the biggest thing right now is the reality of transmediated storytelling, which is how do you do linear storytelling in a non-linear way on multiple platforms. And I'm actually founder of a startup that's trying to solve that problem, right? Because it ties into data and analytics and ties into stuff.
One.
Yeah, that's a good
one.
That to me, it's coming. I think there aren't a lot of great examples of it now, and honestly, I think it's because the media system, between the silos inside big media companies and the way that they interact with agencies, don't allow for real creative to happen across companies. I think it's going to come from startups or smaller companies who have the ability to work across the silos in the organization and have advertising working with digital. Well, actually, digital won't even be a department. It will be everything, right?
Actually, there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing that really well. And because they don't need the advertising, it's not about the advertising dollars. And a lot of them are, actually, I go to a meetup, a transmedia meetup every month. And I do. I'm a little nerdy like that. And basically, it's run really by filmmakers. And the filmmakers are the ones that are trying to find the best ways to tell the story, whether it's by video, and they're integrated websites, that where you're really going down all different kinds of rabbit holes, and it's just very interesting ways of storytelling, all wrapped up into one thing.
Yeah. And one thing that might, maybe partly related to that, going back to the Walt Disney Company, which, loves the franchise. But now that we own Marvel, we're doing shows on Netflix with Marvel. We've got the show on ABC. We've got movies. We've got there's still the comic books and everything. So maybe there's an opportunity there in some way to do something, to develop something that's part of a franchise like that. Who knows?
Yeah, and there's interesting companies. If you with the sort of talking, go back to what Jake was saying about like the big idea and the creative side of it. Starlight Runner, if any of you guys, it's actually a company here, it's an agency here in New York, and they specialize, their whole job is to create story and mythology. So when the Spider-Man franchise was coming out, they literally spent months creating the mythology and outlining, okay, here are the 17 sub-characters that you could sort of leverage into a bigger character, and this is what their backstory is, and this is how they could potentially show up in web or mobile. I mean, so that's now a job, right? That you would actually do that, and these guys are amazing at it. And they do it for Spider-Man, and then the next one they did was Goldfish. Like literally the crackers. Like, what if we turn them into a character? So there's something there too that I think that there's actually an agency that's their whole job, and they're super busy. That we're getting there. We're moving towards it.
They made a Lego movie.
They did.
Well, Jake, Zach, Allison, thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you to our moderator, Laurie.